What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in this video I wanted to highlight some awesome developers and some tools they've created that I think do things even better than SketchUp native tools. Some of these tools have actually replaced the SketchUp tools inside my workflow. So check these out, make sure you stick around to the end because I really think you're going to like the last one. And if there's one that I missed, make sure that you leave it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about it. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so at number 10, we've got a tool that you can download for free in the SketchUp extension warehouse for creating textures in SketchUp called architectures. And so architectures gives you access to a number of different pre-made textures that you can adjust and do really interesting things with. So for example, say that I was to pick one of these brick materials like this one, you can import that material in SketchUp, but you can also edit that material right here. So you can use this to create custom materials that you can then bring into SketchUp. Notice how you have the ability to adjust things like the pattern of materials that are placed on here. So you can use this to create different kinds of things really quickly, and you can bring these into SketchUp and apply them to surfaces. So let's say, for example, we pick the staggered bond. Right here, we can import this material. It'll automatically bring it into the SketchUp materials browser, and you're ready to apply that to surfaces in SketchUp. Plus, if you want to edit it, you can right-click and use the option for Edit with Architectures to go back and edit that material to change it to different things. So for example, if I wanted this to be a different kind of brick, I can adjust this right here, and then I can update it. And so when I do that, it's going to show up inside of SketchUp. So in a lot of cases, especially for Mac users, because I'm not a massive fan of that interface, you can use this to replace the custom material creation process in SketchUp with architectures itself. All right, so next up we've got a tool for quickly placing component axes. And so this is called Curic Axis. You can download it for free from Curic's website. You can also provide a donation if you like what Curic is doing. So if you want to support any of the developers, a lot of the time there's a way to do that. A lot of the time what will happen is when you're dealing with 3D warehouse models or something like that, you bring them in and the authors didn't know that the object axis is important, right? So a lot of the time I'm going to have either a 2D symbol like this one, as well as a face me component and another object right here, and I need that object axis to be centered. Well, finding the central point is actually kind of a pain with the native axis tool. Like I got to go in here and try to find that. If you look at the base of this object, it's not really ideal, and there's no option to snap to any of the component bounds, right? Well, what Curic Axis does is it gives you the ability to snap to different points on your object bounds. So in this case, I can just click right here. When I click on this, notice how it's going to give me options to mouse over different surfaces in order to quickly place the axes. Well, in this case, there's also an option for bottom only, which I can then mouse over the bottom, click right here, and I can adjust the object axis to the middle of this object. Well, now if I double click in here, notice how that's in here based on the central point of the bounds of the object. This is especially important with face me components because face me components rotate around the object axis. So notice how this isn't actually, like if I was to center this on this point right here, then I was to rotate, notice how it's going to rotate out because that axis is in the wrong spot. Well, if I use Curic Axis, I can mouse over this, pick the bottom point, and now that's going to rotate around the central bottom point of the object. So now I've got a 2D face me component that'll stay in place. All right, so if you've ever created terrains using the From Contours tool, so let's say I was to select this surface and create a terrain like this, you know that the geometry that it creates is not always ideal, right? Because it comes in here and it triangulates everything, and it's just triangulating between every point that's inside of the mesh, right? And it gives you these really nasty meshes that can be difficult to edit and adjust. So there's a tool from Fredo 6 that does something similar, but it does it with quad geometry and a grid, allowing you to create much cleaner geometry. So Topo Shaper is a tool from Fredo 6 that's either $15 for a perpetual license or it's in his bundle, which I recommend to everyone for $50. That includes like joint push pull and some other things that we may talk about later in this video. So what Topo Shaper does is it allows you to select a surface and you can generate a grid. So when you do this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to continue to calculating our terrain. What you can do is you can set a grid that it's going to apply across your topology. like this, and you can adjust the size of the grid. Like for example, I could change this to, we'll call it 35 by 30 and click on done. Notice how it's going to give me a denser, actually I need to do it the other way. So 100 by 85, that'll give me a denser grid in here. That'll have more geometry in here, which means it'll be more accurate. But when I click on generate terrain, what this is going to do is this is going to generate the terrain using a grid mesh rather than, it's not really quad because these are still triangulated, but they're quad in the sense that the base shapes are quads rather than this nasty geometry over here. So if you want to create cleaner meshes and more editable meshes, then you're definitely going to want to give TopoShaper a try. All right, so while we're on the subject of surfaces like this one, the way that you can currently do vertex editing in SketchUp is using the Smoove tool. And what that does is that allows you to create surfaces that have a fall off, right? So what that means is that means on the inside you get really strong strength, and then the further away from the center, you get the weaker the adjustment is around the outside. And so that allows you to do things like working with terrains like this one in order to kind of sculpt the terrain. And that's fine, but to me it's a little bit limited in the sense that A, you can only do up and down, but B, it doesn't give you a very good visual of the way that this works. So Vertex Tools from TomTom is an excellent tool for doing this kind of fall off style editing. So what you do is you activate this, and notice how you can see all the vertices in here, and you can select different vertices like this, and you can adjust that selection radius. So if I was to type in 100 feet, it would look like this, but see how you can more visually see how this is going to affect the surface right here. But I can also use it to move things not only up and down, but also side to side. I can use it to do scales, right? And the scale function is going to have that same fall off in here as well. Plus it has better selection tools. So if I want to come in here and do a freehand select, I can draw like this, and it's going to do a freehand select in here, and it's just a better vertex editing tool. The other thing is it's much less likely to crash if you have a number of these selected in here than the native sandbox tools. So if you've ever accidentally selected part of a mesh and then clicked on the Smoove function and then just watched your screen spin, I don't really deal with that with vertex tools. So I like this tool better for vertex and sandbox editing inside of SketchUp. And this is a paid extension. I think it's $40 right now. It also couples really well with TomTom's SubD extension, which allows you to do subdivision modeling in SketchUp. All right, so next up, we've got a tool from Fredo6's free Fredo Tools collection that's basically like an upgraded Move tool. There's a couple things I like about this over the current SketchUp Move tool. So you can call it inside of Fredo Tools, and you can run Move Along, which is the name of the tool, which you can download from Sketchucation, by the way. And so a couple things that I like about this. The first thing is this acts like a normal Move tool, right? It's got all the different inferencing locations, so it's got all the built-in Move functions in here, but then you've also got the ability to do things like aligning objects. So you can click on this option right here to toggle alignment, and when you do that, if you pick a face, notice what this is going to do is this is going to move an object and align that face to the other surface right here. So you can use this in order to quickly set alignments. So one thing you could do is if you wanted to quickly center this on another face, right, you could click on the set alignment function, pick the midpoint, and then you can pick the midpoint, and notice how that's going to quickly place this along the surface. Now, one of the areas where I find this especially helpful is you can also use this to place objects along the path like this. So if I activate this tool right here, use Move Along, and I want to toggle this alignment right here, if I pick this central point, notice how this will automatically try to align this along this edge right here. So it'll align the surface normal with the edge that you're clicking on top of right here. And so the other thing I like about this tool is if you click on the plane function, you can lock this to the Z axis. So now if I pick this object and move it, notice how it gives me this blue indicator, indicating that this is locked to the blue axis. And so you can use this to lock to the different axes in here. So just with those additional align functions and the ability to lock objects to axes, I think this tool works a little bit better than the SketchUp Move tool. What you could do is you could set up a keyboard shortcut to do a Shift M in order to activate this tool so that it's set up to activate along with having access to the original Move tool with just the M key. All right, so next up, if you've ever used the Follow Me tool to extrude a profile. So I've got this not very good base profile that I drew, but it should work for this demonstration. And so let's say that I was to stand this up and I want to create a piece of base along this surface right here. Well, what I can do is I can come in here, I can select this surface, and I can use the Follow Me tool in order to extrude this piece of base around the room like this. That's definitely a valid way of doing this. However, there's a few issues with this. So the first is this generated this not in a group, right? Second, if I have to make any changes to this room, I can't really do that. And then third, if I want to change the profile, I have to come in here and I have to try to delete everything, which if you didn't have everything grouped can be really frustrating. So instead, the tool that I like to use for profiles like this is called Profile Builder. We've talked about it on the channel before. It's super in-depth, but basically what it is it's a tool designed to help you manage your different profiles of things that you want to extrude in SketchUp. So you can use this to generate things like flat profiles and then save them to a library, but then I don't have to align anything to surfaces or anything like that. It's got a built-in Follow Me tool, which will extrude along paths, but it also has the ability for me to select those profiles and swap them out with other profiles. So in this case, we'll just go with this profile right here, but notice how I can just swap this out in place right here. And say that you don't like the direction that this is going, well, I can mirror this and then update it in order to flip the direction, right? So it's non-destructive in the sense that I can make these changes. So in addition, I also have the ability to edit the profile or edit the path that this is following along. So for example, I'm going to double click in this one. Notice how I can click in here and I can adjust this profile like this. I can erase out this extra stuff, and then when I click out of this, notice how now this is going to have a different profile that's in here. So this is basically like a non-destructive profile editor, and it just gives you a lot more control on doing adjustments and changes than the Follow Me tool does. And that's not even including things like the ability to add more complex assemblies as well. This is obviously a paid extension. It does have a cost associated with it, but the tools that it has built in are much better than just the native Follow Me tool. So a lot of the time I've moved to using Profile Builder profiles instead of just the Follow Me tool in SketchUp. All right, so one of the best features in SketchUp's actually built around this feature, is the ability to push-pull faces, right? So you can take flat faces and you can push-pull them. The problem is the built-in push-pull tool cannot push-pull things like curved faces, right? If I click on this surface right here, I can't do that. I also can't select multiple faces and push-pull them all at once, right? You don't have the ability to do that. Well, there's a tool from Fredo6 called Joint Push Pull, which is also contained inside of his bundle. And one of the reasons why I recommend the bundle, I think you can get it for like $15 otherwise or something like that. But the way Joint Push Pull works is it gives you the ability to push pull not only regular faces, right? So I can push pull this regular face just like regular push pull, but I can also push pull curved faces, right? So I can use this in order to create things like recesses inside of SketchUp really quickly. You can also use this tool to select multiple faces like this and push pull them all at once. So if I activate this, notice how these are all going to push-pull. And then you've got some really interesting things you can do with that, like with the normal push-pull, for example. There's a random option where you can randomly push-pull directions, and you can also set tapers on the push-pull that you have in here. But you also have another great tool called vector push-pull, which allows you to push-pull in a direction. And so when you push-pull in a direction, notice how I can use this. I'm going to toggle my thicken on. You can use this to push-pull an object like this, but you can also select the option for flatten in order to push-pull that in a direction like this. So if you wanted to create a flat object from a 3D shape, you can do that. So joint push-pull is basically the push-pull tool in SketchUp, but with a ton of additional very helpful features. All right, so next up we have a tool from S4U that I actually have mapped to Shift F on my keyboard, and I use it instead of the offset tool all the time. So as you know, the offset tool gives you the ability to offset different surfaces. But if you've ever tried to offset either multiple faces or something like that, it can be a little difficult. Now, we could come in here and we could select edges like this with the native offset tool, and then they form a path and you can offset them in like this. However, what S4U offset does is it allows you to select either multiple faces at once. So I could do all of these and do a Shift F. That would allow me to offset all of these faces in at once. But the feature that I really love about this tool is it actually allows you to offset edges, which you can't do with the SketchUp native tool. So if I activate this and I do a Shift F and I click on this, notice how it's going to allow me to offset edges in like this. Not only can I offset multiple edges, I can also right click in order to set either the reverse side, or I can set it to offset to both sides. So in this case, I could take this and I could type in a value of a 1/2 inch right here. So I could type in 0.5, hit the enter key, and that's going to allow me to offset these edges like this. Now this could be especially powerful if you wanted to do something like creating walls from edges. So say I was to offset these in like this, but say that I had a wall and I wanted to draw it like this, I could use S4U offset to offset those edges in two different directions like this. So if I wanted this to be a 4-inch wall, for example, or whatever, I could just type in 2, hit the enter key, and that's going to offset this in both directions. The other thing that's really powerful about this is you could also use it to select an edge. You could do a Shift F and you can offset it in two directions, and you could use it to create things like doors centered in walls really quickly. So in this case, I type in 18, hit the enter key, then I could erase this out, and I have my door opening right here. So that ability to offset edges is really powerful. The other thing I really like about this tool is it gives you the ability to offset as a group. So in a lot of situations, what I want to do, say that I'm creating a cabinet, for example, I want to take this surface and I want to offset it in. But if you do it with the SketchUp tool and you're doing it at like 1/8 of an inch, something like that, then you've still got kind of this leftover geometry in here. So I'm creating a door and I want this to be separate geometry, but right now it's all just kind of merged with everything. Well, if I use S4U offset instead, what I can do is I can do a Shift F, I can offset this in, and I can set it to one side, but I can right click and click on group offset. Now, if I offset this in by, we'll call it a 1/4 inch, and hit the enter key, and you want to make sure you type in the inches side because it'll actually do multiple offsets as well. But if I type in 0.25 and hit the enter key right here, notice what it does is it creates that as a group. Well, then I can get into this group, I can push-pull the surface, and you might have to draw over top of it again. But I can push-pull out a surface to whatever, call it 3/4 of an inch right here, and I can use that to really quickly create a cabinet door on this surface without it merging with all of the other geometry in here. So I use this probably as much or more as the regular SketchUp offset tool. All right, so next up is a tool that is really better than the paint bucket tool for applying materials to complex surfaces. So if you've ever got a surface like this one and you would try to apply something with an obvious tile, so these ornate tiles are a great example, notice how you've got an issue with the way that these apply, right? The paint bucket tool just doesn't quite understand the mapping of a complex surface like this. Now, there's things you could do with like creating a projected texture and all of that, but that's a lot of additional work and it's a little bit clunky. So instead, there's a tool from Fredo 6, and I think perpetual license on this one is like $20 or something like that. But the way that this tool works is you can select a material. So for example, I'm going to sample this material right here, and notice how this has UV mapping modes. What UV mapping modes do is it allows you to set the way that the material is applied to a surface. So you can project them, you can set them to follow a quad mesh, but then you can also click and you can use this to adjust the way the material sits on the surface, as well as scaling that material up and down on the surface and rotating it on the surface like this. So just vastly more powerful in a lot of ways than the tools that you're seeing from SketchUp. So anytime I have a complex surface like this one, I go straight to through paint. In my opinion, it's one of the vital tools for working with complex surfaces that need texturing in SketchUp. All right, and then finally, you probably know that the curve creation and editing tools in SketchUp are extremely limited. So you basically have either the arc tool, you have circles, or you have the freehand tool. And so the problem is, if you want to create a curve along a path, this tool is really not ideal for that, right? Because you're just generating these 3-point arcs like this, which are fine, but if you want to do something more complex, there's not really a great way to do that. And then the freehand tool doesn't even create curves, it just kind of creates a really clunky edge like this. So Fredo Spline is a complex curve creation tool from Fredo 6 for creating complex curves. So if you use Fredo Spline, you have the ability to actually create different kinds of splines with control points. So notice what this does is this gives you the ability to set all of these different points in order to edit this curve. Then when you're done, you can just double click in order to finalize the curve. Now, the first thing you're going to note is these control points are movable and adjustable, giving you the ability to make changes to these curves inside of SketchUp itself. So you can also adjust things like the weight of the corners in order to adjust what happens on the different corners. Now, another place that this is super powerful, so if I right click on this curve and I go to Fredo Spline, notice how I can edit that curve after the fact. Not only can I edit it, I can also swap it out for different kinds of curves. So you can draw different curves in SketchUp, and you can also adjust things. Like I have heavily used this polyline divider and the polyline segmenter in order to take curves and set the number of points that are included in a curve in order to make things the same number of segments for creating things like surfaces and other things like that. The perpetual license on this one is $30, but it's a super powerful curve creation and editing tool. So another thing I like about it is you can also lock a plane in here. So if I want to lock this to a horizontal plane, I can set this where it's never going to come off of the plane because we've locked it to the Z axis. So if you do anything with complex curves, Fredo Spline is a must in SketchUp. All right, so those are some of my favorite tools from developers that I think have probably surpassed the corresponding SketchUp tools, and I use all the time. So leave a comment below, let me know if there's anything that I left off this list. I just love having that conversation with you guys. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.